Welcome to the first episode of Misplaced Neurons. My name is Yolande Dupont and I am the mother of Ella, born with X-linked PVNH on August 7, 2008, and who passed away from complications of the disorder at just 8 months old on March 27, 2009. I am also the daughter of a mother who did not know that she had X-linked PVNH until after we lost Ella. I then discovered that myself, I am affected by X-linked PVNH as well. I will be your host for a series of conversation about Periventricular Nodular Heterotopia, also known as PVNH or PNH, Gray Matter Heterotopia, also known as GMH, and Subcortical Heterotopia, also known as SBH, and everything in between. You might wonder what these names and acronyms stand for. And we'll talk about these in a second, but all three really are rare malformations of cortical development characterized by nerve cells or neurons not migrating properly to their proper location in the brain during development. They are often genetic, and sometimes the root cause is really hard to find. Some affected individuals may be asymptomatic, and others may experience a variety of symptoms involving different organs and ranging from mild to moderate to severe. One of the most common symptoms is epilepsy. And for some form of the disorders, it may represent a life-threatening situation. Today is March 1st, and it marks the beginning of #MarchOnPVNH, the 9th edition of the Month of Awareness for PVNH, GMH, and SBH. And I am thrilled to be chatting today with, actually, originally it was 3, and now I have 4 special guests. So Christina Fraser, Jane Hartley Jock, and Jennifer Sheffield Harrington, along with her daughter Parson. Both Christina, Parson, and Jennifer, actually all Christina, Jennifer, and Parson live in the US, and Jane lives in the UK. Christina is a occupational therapist and an adult diagnosed as an adult with PVNH. And Jennifer is mom to Parson, who is diagnosed with X-linked PVNH as a baby. And Jennifer is a school counselor. And Jane is in the UK, also affected by X-linked PVNH, just like her daughter also is affected by PVNH. And she is a retired biomedical scientist. And so it is my pleasure to be here with you all as we start the month of celebration for March on PVNH. And full disclosure, I've known Christina, Jennifer, and Jane, I've known for a long time, as they are by my side moderating the PVNH support community online. It's truly an honor to be with you all from my home here in Vancouver, BC, Canada, all the way to Colorado, Texas, and England. Welcome all.
Hello.
Thank you. Thank you. I am very excited to be here today.
Who's got a dog?
That's me. I need to go let him out.
Christina, go. The joys of live, right? So, yes.
Thanks for having us today. It is so important for us and our family to raise awareness for PVNH, especially going into the month of March. Thank you for having us, and thank you for letting us tell our story so that hopefully we can help others along the way.
Thank you. Jane, do you have anything to add?
It's been a journey of discovery, really, for me and Caroline. Like, I was born in 1959, and looking back, I had the symptoms of X-linked PVNH at birth with an omphalocele and bowel symptoms. Now, that would have never been linked with PVNH, because obviously it wasn't known about. And only later, when I was diagnosed with that in 2008, but retrospectively it was linked. because it was known then that that and a malrotated bowel were symptoms of X-linked PV&H. And obviously I developed epilepsy in my teens. Well, again, that was another symptom in my teens. And it was only when I became ill in my 40s, teeth and joint pain, and I began to go into the doctors a lot and was working in epilepsy, although it wasn't recognised as that. And it was kind of poo-pooed. And it was only after that that I got referred to a genetic counsellor, and my daughter Caroline had very similar symptoms, that we got diagnosed with X-linked PV&H clinically, and then we went to tests.
Jane, what year was that in? Because our stories are quite different, right? Christina was diagnosed as an adult. Parson was diagnosed when she was a baby. I was diagnosed at 41. Ella was just a baby too, and my mom was 71.
I'd have been diagnosed 2008, 2009, just on the cusp of the year. So 2009, I'd have been 50.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Jennifer, your story, your family story is in some ways, there's so many similarities that I see with Ella's story, right? Thankfully though, Parson is doing well. She's thriving, right? Parson, yeah, you've got a lot of things going on to help the hospital and to bring awareness to, we have a barky dog with us. So, you know, Parson, you're so fierce and we're so grateful that you're doing so well. Can you tell us, Jennifer, when Parson, when this happened for you all?
Sure. Parson was born 39 weeks, a typical pregnancy, typical delivery with C-section. She did have some respiratory issues at birth. She spent about 7 days in NICU, but nothing that anyone saw any need for concern. Until about 2 months old, we landed from our pediatrician, sent us directly to Texas Children's Hospital. That is where we presented with a cough and respiratory distress, ultimately respiratory failure. And thankfully, being in the right place at the right time with brilliant minds, a doctor, after a chest CT, a CAT scan, a doctor said, you know, she really reminds me of those other Filament A girls. And I signed consent for them to wheel her off for a brain MRI. And I said, now what are we, what are we imaging here? And he said, the brain. And I still did not know, but I knew I was in a premier teaching institution with some of the greatest minds, and much as they expected, it was confirmed through the MRI at 2 months old. Parson
Incredible.
rocked along great for probably until about, we discharged on oxygen at that time until she was about 5 months old, and she went into respiratory failure again when we landed back in the hospital. And that's when the team began to talk to us about a lung transplant because her lungs were in end-stage lung disease, much like an elderly person with COPD. So we are so grateful for the gift of life that she received at 11 months old. She received new lungs from a donor, and our journey from then has been all up.
Jennifer, can you remind us, so that was in 2012, if I'm not mistaken.
She works hard. She's October of 2012 was the diagnosis.
October 2012. And it is right before that, I think, that you joined the PV&H support community, if I'm not mistaken, because I remember staying up all night waiting to hear, and I'm going to get emotional, you know, thinking about it, but waiting to hear that Parson was doing well.
Yolene, you have to know,
Jennifer, you're breaking up a little bit. I'm not sure if it's my connection or if it's your connection.
I think it's hers.
Yeah. Jennifer, you're frozen. So I'm gonna go to Christina for a second so we can hear Christina's side of the story, and then I'll come back to each of you as well. So Christina, can you tell us a little bit about how your diagnostic or how your journey started with PVNH?
So I was 32, I believe, when I was finally diagnosed with PVNH. I have unilateral, so on the left side of my ventricle, multiple nodules. When I was a child, I always felt much different than, I didn't realize till later just how much my GI tract had been involved with something. Nobody could figure out exactly what was causing my ailments. So I started cutting out food at a very young age, just thinking it was pretty normal for people to not be able to tolerate pretty much anything. And then when I started high school, I started developing visual auras. And still, like, something just doesn't seem right. Going to doctors, and they didn't really have much to say. Just I was diagnosed with classic migraines at that time. And then things just continued to progress. By the time I was in college and running track, and my body just hurt incredibly bad. Like every time I would finish, like I just was in a lot of pain. Both my brother and I were in athletic training, so he was doing some provocative tests on me, and my hips would dislocate. So that was kind of an unusual finding. And I started grad school, and again, just all these weird symptoms. My GI system just started to get worse and worse. Was passing out, trying to seek care, and nobody could really figure out what was causing my symptoms. And finally, they found that I had yeast growing in my esophagus, which is really rare, not quite figuring out what was going on. And then I was involved in 2 major car accidents, kind of back to back, and kind of threw me into the medical system. And I moved to California by this time, just trying to find more answers from medical teams, just trying to help me. And finally found a rheumatologist that kind of put 2 and 2 together, that something just, we needed to find more answers. She finally sent me for my first brain MRI. Well, actually it was sent for my joints because they thought something was, the headaches was coming from the car accidents and TMJ. And she, on the brain scan that got captured from the TMJ, noticed that there was PV&H. She's like, well, good news, you don't have a brain tumor. But I have no idea what that means. So she then referred me to neurology, and they were worried about MS, other things, because most neurologists don't really know much about PV&H as well. So it was kind of jumping from neurologist to neurologist, trying to find answers. Nobody still has given me a clear answer. They just tell me it's congenital. None of my symptoms of my visual auras, now that have progressed into sensory, kind of a marching sensation at my arm, have anything to do with PV&H, which is kind of hard for me to totally swallow. But
how old were you, Christina, when you got your diagnosis as an adult for PV&H? 32. Thank you. Yeah. It's hard to know, like it's because it's so unknown still, even among neurologists, right, who should be aware of the conditions, or who sometimes don't realize that it has a multi-system impact. It's really hard for us, whether we're adults or parents fighting for our children, to fight in a system that doesn't really know how to help rare disease patients, rare individuals. I see that Jennifer has just joined us back. Christina, we'll get back to what both you and Jane, told us about your own stories, but let's go to Jennifer so she can tell us a little bit more about Parson's story.
Yolene, sorry about that.
That's okay.
Internet's a little iffy here in rural areas. I apologize.
It's all right.
So one interesting thing that I started to mention a while ago, so they were going to do a scope on Parson. They were hoping there was something anatomically wrong with her lungs at the time. And the ENT came out and said, no, it's not a fissure. It's not anything along those lines. And I had the fellow from the ICU write down PV&H for me. And I had, and I was Googling as fast as my little thumbs would Google there in the hospital waiting room. And I texted our pediatrician here and said, Dr. Fadone, they're 98% sure they have a diagnosis, and it's periventricular nodular heterotopia. And he said, Jen, you have misunderstood. This is, no, you've misunderstood. And I said, I promise, Dr. Fadone, I had them write it down for me. And I still have that paper to this day. And he still said, Jen, who told you this? And so I told him Dr. Gillerman, who was the radiologist that read the MRI. And he said, okay, Jen. And he calls me back about 45 minutes later. And he said, Jen, I've just been on the phone with Dr. Gillerman, and you didn't misunderstand. You were correct. And now we've put some of the puzzle together. But I Googled as much as I could Google, and there was nothing there. And it certainly didn't correspond with the lung issues that were presenting at the time. So we've really, really grown in that time of me finding you in the night and you finding me in the night. And the crazy thing about Parson, and I think many of our experiences is that our primary issue, our primary presenting problem with the neurons not migrating properly, have caused a whole host of other secondary things going on. And in our case, we see those most predominantly in the lung issues for Parson.
Thank you for sharing that, Jennifer. You brought up the point that, years ago, like PV&H support and awareness was created in 2009 when we finally got a diagnosis for Ella that passed away without a diagnosis, really. But what you mentioned in your journey is so similar in so many ways to what happened to my family. And FLNA and periventricular heterotopia were on the table when Ella was alive. We just couldn't prove it. And we also, at the time, weren't really sure that the FLNA was causing lung issues, even though at the time, the team in Texas that you mentioned, the extraordinary team in Texas, among many other teams now around the world, are studying and caring for little girls like Ella, like Parson, and not only those with FLNA, but those with the other genes and those that do not have their genes identified yet for their periventricular nodular heterotopia, or perhaps another, diagnosis. There's no really confirmation how it came about. It's so important to me that you are here today with me to launch the day of, the month, what am I saying? The month, March on PV&H. Oh my God, it's early here. I haven't had coffee. I don't know if you can tell. So in all of your stories, Jane being for so many years not able to find what was happening. Christina, same thing. And even though Jennifer, you had a medical team that helped you and your family and Parson, thrive really quickly by being able to discover, a mutation. So what does this network that you all help me grow and nurture and support mean? Why is this important? to celebrate March on PVNH, just like we celebrate World PVNH Awareness Day on August 7th, just like we continue to try to raise awareness day in and day out, year over year. Why is it important? Who wants to go first?
Okay. So obviously when you have struggled for so long to, like, you know something is wrong and doctors have told you time and time again, it's just in your head. Now having a network that, like, you don't feel so alone is so important, to be able to kind of bond together and work together as a team, trying to build a network to be able to provide more education, because I have to teach all of my medical team what they need to be looking for. They think that I probably have a hidden FNLA gene mutation. They just can't find it at this time. And without having a specific diagnosis, it's just incredibly isolating. You feel so alone if you don't have a family network. So it's just so much of a family working together. We all have our similarities, we all have our differences, but at the end of the day, we all are united by having the same condition.
True that. Jane, what does it mean to you?
There's a lot of other conditions which go with PVNH, obviously. And the thing about PVNH, it affects, well, certainly X-linked PVNH, it affects the majority of women. And I don't know what healthcare is like in the US, but certainly in the UK, if you go to your doctor with vague symptoms such as aches and pains, headaches, they might do a basic investigation, but again, you'll be told it's all in your head, or it'll be something like do more exercise, lose a bit of weight, you know, and you'll be kind of chewed off, you know, that it's nothing serious. And to be fair, there are a lot of rare diseases. Doctors tend to look at for the obvious ones. So again, if we hadn't been in this group, we'd have had no idea that X-linked PVNH also affected lungs. And my daughter's also got COPD. Now she is an adult, she's in her 30s, but she's quite badly affected by it. So again, when we were talking to Elaine about that, she recommended a treatment, and my daughter's just started it. And again, with other people, you'll see what treatment they've had, what problems they're having. You can see what they've done about it. You can suggest things for them. Now, I did get diagnosed with my diagnosis before I was in the group, so I was fortunate with that. But again, and also, like I said, I had a diagnosis of epilepsy. But again, when I went to the doctors when I was in my early 40s, when I started to deteriorate, I got poo-pooed. They did an EEG, so they did realise that was very abnormal, which it has been all the time. So they did do some treatment, but they never recommended an MRI or anything. And it was only when I was working up in Scotland and I saw a neurologist there for a second opinion. And she said, have you had an MRI? I said, no. And it was, what, you've never had an MRI? And she sent me for an MRI. And it was that which revealed the PVNH. So if I hadn't have been to see her and had the MRI, I don't know whether I'd have ever found the PVNH. And it was like that all the time with the doctors. I had to push and push and push to get any farther forward with treatment. And of course, like I said before, Caroline was showing very similar symptoms. So it took a lot of pushing to get any farther forward and to finally see the geneticist, who was absolutely wonderful. So basically, that is another reason why the group is good, you know, because people also have that, you know, and you can understand people going through that and meeting a brick wall, because I think an awful lot of people have been there. So it's mutual support and, you know, experiences.
Absolutely. I mean, as it stands today, we have more than 700 families from 34 countries that have, you know, participated in the PVNH support community that was created in 2009. And so while we don't recommend treatments, we can't, we're not medical professionals. And even if we were, we don't know each other's medical history. We can talk about our own experiences and, you know, gain and receive and give some knowledge, I think, to each other about what our particular journey has been, what has worked for us, so that, you know, individuals, parents of children affected or adult individuals affected by either PVNH, GMH, or SBH can go back to their medical team and work together to learn together. Jennifer, I think that was also part of your journey, right? That whole learning curve with person. And it goes in her case because she's a child. You know, there's so many more components as well as she grows that come into play, I think, right?
Right. And I can tell you the group in the PVNH support community has been so invaluable to me as a mom, because while my child could not put into words what she was experiencing or feeling, or maybe what was different, you guys and others in the group have been able to almost pave the road for me to know, hey, these are some new things out there that we're seeing or experiencing, and even what to expect at the next little bit as far as development, or as far as, you know, these are symptoms and signs that we need to address with our doctors and those that we don't. While my child doesn't have words and doesn't know that what she's got going on is different, it's great to have a group of people that, while miles separate us, we're not separated yet. We're able to connect in a way like Christina, Yolene, and Jane are here today. It's invaluable to us. It's invaluable to me as a parent.
Thank you. What about the other symptoms? You know, we've talked a little bit about epilepsy. We've certainly talked about the lung component of PVNH that's associated mostly with the FLNA form of the disorder, the FLNA deficiency. Jane, you also alluded that PVNH can happen with other disorders. It can be caused by, we know, like, there's quite many genes right now that are involved with PVNH. There's also chromosomal abnormalities, rearrangements. But what does that mean physically and or cognitively for you as an adult, or, you know, for you, Jennifer, in helping Parson, you know, for us to be able to thrive in our society and community? Who wants to go first?
Well, I can only speak for myself and my daughter. Again, it was a learning curve, really. But like, there is something up with you. I was diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome as well, which can present in different ways. So again, that explained the fatigue and the pain. And again, I also could then acknowledge mental health issues, which before I'd always tried to push to one side, that I did have anxiety and depression. And I've also been, only in the past 2 years, diagnosed with autism. So again, it opens up those other avenues.
Thank you, Jane.
And again, those are linked with the FNLA.
They are indeed, yes.
And with me, like Yolene, like you mentioned, that there's different possible chromosomes. I was sent to genetics, and they did find chromosome 17 on the short arm. So chromosome 17p 11.2 has been found for me, where there is, the reason why it was even found is because they did the brain malformation panel. And found benign D1, which usually causes Jupert syndrome. But I am the only one in the world known to have a duplication, so they don't quite understand what that means. But with that being said, there are people with PV&H, or at least gray matter heterotopia, with that gene duplicate or deletion. So there is some possibility that the 7 genes are working together to cause my presentation of the EDS, the joint hypermobility, as well as I have a dilated inferior vena cava. They don't really know what that means, because usually in FNLA, it seems to affect more of the aorta versus the other major arteries. But it is a major artery, so how does that impact? I have been diagnosed with POTS, so I have a hard time with exercise intolerance now. It's what used to identify me as being a strong athlete now is almost bring sheer anxiety of just passing out, the extreme pain. Just nobody quite understands. I also have, it's just all these different symptoms, and it's just what is causing what, because I also have autoimmune diseases on top of all of that. So, which can also go with FNLA as well. I have the antibodies for rheumatoid arthritis. So it's, it's just all complicated. You just don't know at the end of the day. But my rheumatologist, now that I have here in Denver, has been very supportive, as well as my GP. Everybody is trying to work together. They think something is definitely linking everything together. They just don't know what.
It makes sense, right? When you look at it, I mean, like, we're the experts on our own body. We see everything. It's just a matter of being able to work with that one professional, medical professional, or a team that will help us. Jennifer, did you have anything to add to that?
Yes, probably our other secondary thing that we have going on, as our pediatrician says, that Parson has a lot of fun things going on. That's the way
I use that expression a lot too.
That's the way he describes it, so we just go with it. But she has some cardiac complications that we monitor very, like Christina mentioned. Hers is an aortic root dilation. She has been on beta blockers, a combination therapy of those for, years now. And we monitor that very closely in hopes that they've been able to slow the progression of her Z-score in increasing. But cardiac is probably our biggest issue that we monitor, in addition to the lung issue.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, and I myself do have the cardiac component going on, as well as the lung issue, obviously not as severely as Ella did. But I also have the blood disorder. So FLNA can also affect platelets. And so I'm monitored very carefully from, right now, I think my team is comprised of about 8 different specialists, which is kind of normal for rare disorders, right? That's what we expect. Having one of them take the lead is always so important. If there is anything that we're coming like closer to the close of our conversation today, but if there was anything that you would want to say to either a new parent starting on this journey, someone who has just been, who had just received a diagnosis for their child, or as an adult for themselves, or someone that has had this diagnosis for a while, but is suddenly looking into it again, maybe for the first time in years. What is there, like, what would you say with hindsight, with your experience with the PVNH community, with your personal experience dealing with a loved one affected or yourself being affected? Is there any kind of words of wisdom that you would share to anyone?
I mean, personally, I would tell, you know your body best. Don't give up. there are doctors out there that are willing to try and work together and try and be educated. They want to try and be helpful. That, you know, you just have to be your own advocate and finding the right support groups. I think that was the turning point for me. Finally, like, even though I haven't gotten great answers, but just knowing that you know, having a physical diagnosis has really helped, at least for myself, given me the, just like, finally, there is an answer for this, whether I get the support from everybody else in my medical team saying that it is causing something, that I know in my heart that there are answers out there. So don't give up.
True that.
Absolutely, yeah. I'd echo that. Be your own advocate. And basically, if the doctors speak down to you and say there's nothing up, if you think there is something up, push on and ask again. You know, don't let them tell you that there's nothing up with you. If you think there is, you know, ask.
Absolutely. Jennifer?
Well, and I think it's so important that, you know, in our initial diagnosis, when we didn't even know what the road was going to lead, that's where I found you in the night at 2 months old. And I'll never forget, even though I felt extremely alone in that hospital room with my child in respiratory failure, I remember all of a sudden, even though, you know, even my pediatrician was saying, Jen, you've misunderstood, I all of a sudden had, he encouraged me to reach out and find a support group, find a community. And that is what we found with you guys. And we continue to grow, like you said, but it's so helpful to know, even though if there's not anyone geographically around you that shares the diagnosis, there's so many out there that do share a diagnosis and share the road with you, even if it's not the exact same signs and symptoms. But it is so great to know you have others rowing the same boat, so to speak, and knowing you're not in that boat alone.
Absolutely. I mean, yesterday was Rare Disease Day, and I was part of a conversation with our genetic counselor, the genetic counselor that's responsible for helping me find a diagnosis, not only for Ella, but for my family. And she now works for Blueprint Genetics, but at the time she was with BC Children's here in Vancouver. And all throughout Ella's hospitalization, there were 4, one when she was born, and then 2, sorry, 4, yeah, 2, 3. I can't even keep track anymore. She was hospitalized for at least 6 months out of almost 8 months. And all that to say that all along I kept saying, this comes from me. This comes from me. She's too much like me. I see so much of me in the symptoms that she's experiencing. And at first, I was deemed a worried first-time mother. I was 40 when she was born. And then it's all in your head. You're wearing pink roses glasses. We know, right? And the fact is, we don't always know. And even with an autopsy report, there was still some questions. The autopsy report pointed clearly to X-linked PV&H, and with the filamin A mutation. And with that, even that, we still had some pushback. And at the time, we already had a periventricular nodular heterotopia diagnosis on paper because she'd had an MRI. It was that piece with the lung that wasn't really well known, even though at the time, the team in Texas already did work with little girls affected by the disorder, but it wasn't really public. It wasn't really out there. And so for me, this fight that, you know, that educate that we've been talking about, that push back, all with good intentions coming from medical professional, is so important that we trust our gut. We won't always have the answers, but sometimes we'll get lucky. And when we do, that puzzle starts to take shape and the missing pieces come together. And the minute we had that diagnosis formally confirmed is when I created PV&H Support and Awareness and the PV&H support community. And within days, a family in New Zealand, a family in Germany, a family in the US, and it started from me looking for that network that didn't exist, that was nowhere to be found, and families deeply needing answers. And so as we continue the month of March on PV&H, I would like very much to continue the conversations with you. Sometimes it could be one-on-one, it could be in groups again, and surely we'll invite some medical professionals that have been working with us to enlighten us, to educate us, and, you know, back at them, we educate them too. We've done our conferences before where we put, you know, families and medical professionals together so that they can learn from each other. But I think this is a really important and easy way for us to make an impact in everyone that's affected and the parents of the children that are affected in their lives, right? So what do you say, guys? Is that something that you'd be interested in doing with me in the next month and obviously beyond the month of March?
Absolutely. Yep.
Cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you so much to all three of you. Any specific words before we close and I do my little spiel about how everyone can reach us if they have questions or comments?
We're grateful for your connection, Yolaine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Couldn't do it without you guys.
Yeah.
Like, the reason we have a community is because we have a community to serve, right? That's how I see it.
Yes.
So thank you to all three of you. It was an honor, it was a blessing, it was emotional, and it was happy for me to be able to spend time with you all. See, I'm going to get emotional again. For those who are either watching the video or listening on the audio today and who have questions for Christina, Jennifer, Jane, Parson, or myself, is it okay that I mention Parson for questions too? I haven't asked her if she's okay answering questions, but I think she might.
Absolutely.
So, there she is. It's okay, Parson, if people want to ask you questions. Yeah. Okay. I'll send mom an email if that's the case.
Sure.
So people can reach me at yolaine@pvnhsupport.com. That's YOLAINE at PVNHsupport.com. So please know that I'll share the comments, the questions that come through with our guests today. And know that, you know, during the month of March and beyond, we'll also have guests in the future who are impacted by GMH, SBH, and it is my hope as well that we can wrangle some of our very busy medical professionals, our medical experts from around the world to join us to talk about the topics that matter to you. So throughout the month of March, hashtag March on PVNH, and all year long, I invite you who are listening and watching to open your mind with curiosity and ask questions about PVNH, GMH, and SBH. We may not always have the answers, but together we unite to raise awareness, and we want to educate not only each other, but the medical community. We want to be able to continue advocating for better treatment and care options. And with that comes the aim to continue to fund more research and eventually, hopefully, find a cure. Our mission is to positively impact the lives of affected individuals and their families. It's been a pleasure to host Misplaced Neurons. Until next time, I send you ladybug hugs and butterfly kisses. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yolaine.
Bye.
Thank you.